Hi, this is Mike from Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and today we're going to be taking a look at Lian Li's Lancool 215. Cheap, but is it good? Let's find out. Okay, so in today's video we'll be taking a look at Lian Li's Lancool 215. This is, as far as I know, the only case from Lian Li that they didn't actually make themselves. They have had design kind of input on this, but it's based around an almost generic chassis. So they've added certain features such as their branding, some RGB and other features like that. There is a very similar case to this one, which is based on pretty much the same chassis, which is the Gamemax F15, which you can check out from the review up here. So I will be referring to that in a lot of instances and kind of the pros and cons between the two. At the moment here in the UK, they are pretty much both exactly the same price, at around about £70. So they do cater for that kind of mid to mid-high range gamer. Notable features on this case, as you can see pretty much straight away, is our full mesh front, also the whopping 200mm fans, and there's two of them, so airflow shouldn't be an issue with this at all. Also, we've got the prerequisite for a gaming PC, which is the tempered glass side panel, and also we've got some other nice features like a removable top mesh filter, and also a full-length bottom mesh filter also, which is a really nice thing to see. This will fit pretty much most motherboards, so extended ATX, ATX, micro ATX and ITX, should you feel the compelling urge to do so. But essentially you can fit a lot of stuff in here, including a 360mm water cooler up front if you wanted to. But really, because this has got the two big fans and that is kind of part of the design, why you'd want to take those out and put a 360mm radiator in there, Lord only knows. But it is potentially an option. So let's take a tour around the case and I'll go through some of the pros and cons, my personal findings. I won't be doing a full build in this particular video. This is just basically an overlook and a guide of what the case is all about, all that kind of stuff. Almost like a talking head video really, but we will try and point out any potential downsides and obviously my recommendations at the very end. I will, as a follow-up to this video, be doing a full build in this as well. So if you want to see how that goes, don't forget to click on the subscribe button, chime button, all that kind of usual YouTube stuff. So let's start at the front, which is, yeah, pretty much the star of the show. So we've got this full mesh front. And again, this is almost identical to the Gamemax version. Their implementation is slightly different. There's a little bit more going on the sides, which their version looks a little bit more like the half cases from Cooler Master, whereas this actually is in keeping with the rest of Lian Li's designs. If you look at some of their other ones, like the Lancool 2, etc., Lancool 2 Mesh, they've all got this very similar symmetrical front, so it does look very in keeping with the rest of their range. Removing the front panel is relatively straightforward, and there is a grab handle on the bottom. Nice thing to see as well, the grab handle, even though there is a empty space there, it is actually packed out above there, so this isn't going to be an area where it's going to take in unfiltered air. Removing the front panel is something of a struggle, so if I've cut the video there, that's because the camera was shaking like crazy, but at least it's going to be held in pretty well. It is held in place with 8 mounting areas, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's going to keep it in there and it's going to keep it nice and rigid. One thing I did notice, particularly because of the design of this, how it's made out, because it is majority mesh, there is a little bit of flex to this, so it is a little bit on the delicate side. And obviously if you're working on the PC with this somewhere, try to put it somewhere safe so you don't accidentally press down on the mesh, because there's no actual reinforcement behind that metal mesh. Looking at the bottom, there is a channel just here, which is where the LEDs shine through, and you see there is an LED section at the bottom here, which is addressable, which is working in tandem with the fans. So again, the Lian Li logo lights up there, which you'll probably see from some B-roll. The mesh itself is a pretty decent mesh. It's relatively fine, so it should trap quite a lot of debris, dust, etc. It's not like a nylon mesh, which would be a better option, but certainly it is a little bit of a tighter mesh than comes with the Gamemax case. So if filtration is an issue for you and you're in a slightly more dusty environment, then maybe that would swing you in the favor of this case. Moving on to the fans. So the fans have an RPM maximum of 800 RPM, give or take 10%. So that is pretty much in keeping with most 200mm fans. Although you could, if you wanted to, obviously swap these out for something a little bit higher end and possibly a little bit quieter, but less blingy, such as the Noctua, the A20s, which you can check out up here. Whether or not they'll physically fit in there, I don't know at the moment. I haven't actually tried. That is the thing with 200mm fans, they are not a specific industry standard, so most implementations differ on how they're mounted. Antec's version is different on the big boy fan, and I'm pretty sure these are going to be different as well from the Noctuas, so obviously don't just rush out and buy them, do your measurements first, or wait for Project Stealth to come out. So looking back at the fans, they've got this opaque design to them, so the RGBs, which are actually inside the hub area, will diffuse through the blades themselves. Again, you'll probably see some B-roll of this at some stage, or later on in the video we'll put a power supply in and go through the lighting cycles, etc., so you can see what it's all about. Fan-wise, you have no issues at all. Again, they look almost identical, if not identical, to the ones in the Gamemax F15, and they work very well. The light is very nice, very bright, and they actually do move quite a considerable amount of air. There is a slight tick to them, which is often a case with larger diameter fans, purely because you've got a little bit of extra wiggle room from side to side. Obviously with a smaller fan, you've got a more kind of concentrated area around the bearing, so the ticking is less obvious, at least on good quality fans. The fans themselves have connectivity, so you've got a PWM style connection, although there is a 3-pin one, so you're working off voltage rather than PWM. And also there is the standard 5-volt 3-pin addressable RGB, and that is the same for both of those fans. There is actually a controller in the back, which we'll take a look at in a minute, and that's where it all connects up to. But obviously if you wanted to, you can connect these directly to a compatible motherboard and omitting the controller altogether. Moving around to the side of the case, we've got this nice tempered glass panel, and you've got an outside edge around it as well. This actually still got the film on it, which I'll be leaving on there until I've finished in the build so as not to damage it. And it's held on really easily with 2 thumb screws, which are captive. There isn't actually a grab handle on the back, which is a little bit annoying, so you kind of have to tug at it a little bit to try and get it off, as you can see. But when it's off, it's actually okay, and there's a metal bracing around all the edges, which is really good to see. The one thing that this suffers from, which is exactly the same with the Gamemax case, is where these actually mount. The mountings are quite minimal. So there's basically a lug here and a lug here, and that is basically all that locates it up front. Would have been nice to have seen an additional lug in the middle, just to maybe brace it a little bit more. There is a little bit of flex in these panels, which I'll show you on the back one, because obviously it's a little bit more evident because metal is more flexible than glass. If glass starts flexing, yeah, that's a bad thing, so don't let that happen. Back side and all of the kind of metal work is all done really nicely in this kind of satin matte black finish. It's not actually a deep black, there's a kind of hint of grey to it, so it's not a jet black, but it's yeah, still almost black. So looking inside the case itself, so start from the bottom, so we've got the basement section, and this is one area where this actually does do better than the Gamemax in my personal opinion. We don't have a cutout on the side for the power supply. I don't know why, I dislike those immensely. I don't necessarily want to see what power supply is in there, and actually the whole point of a power supply basement is to hide everything so you don't know what is going on down there, so you concentrate on all the good looking stuff up top. So the last thing you want is a cutout breaking up that nice clean line. Also as well, one thing that they have added, which kind of makes sense but I still don't particularly like, is this mesh top section over the basement. You can, if you want to, you can add 120mm fans in these 2 sections here, and all the screws to do that are included in this little baggie. There is a cutout at the front for if you're wanting to mount a 360mm radiator, or perhaps put some 120mm fans behind here, or whatever you want to do behind there. Obviously again, because this is kind of sold with the whole idea of being the look of this case, I don't think many people are going to end up putting a 360mm radiator in there. But again, as trends change, if you've still got this case in maybe a couple of years and everyone's gone down the 360mm radiator route, then obviously it is a possibility and it still will fit. Which takes me back into this mesh section. So as it stands, as you can see where the fans are, they kind of go right to the bottom. So there is some airflow going into this basement area, which is good if you've got hard drives in there, which you can do, to keep those ventilated. And also some of the air which isn't being kind of used in that section can then come back up into the main chamber through this ventilated mesh. And obviously if you've got a graphics card in here, some of that cool air is going to come up through and back into your graphics card. Personally myself, I would prefer to see this all blanked off and be solid like that. Again, personal preference, but for me it adds a little bit of rigidity to the actual build. There is a little bit of flex going on here, not too much though. It's relatively stiff there. You have also got some cutouts at the back in some pretty handy positions for wiring up things like your HD audio, USB 2 headers, IO ports, that kind of thing. So those are really nice and easy to get to, although you probably find that with a power supply installed, you want to get those cables pushed through first of all before you put the power supply in, just in case there's a little bit too much of a close tolerance. So moving up onto the back section, the main motherboard mounting area. So really nice flat section. Again, you can install up to EATX size motherboards in here. And a nice thing that I've seen is all of the pillars are actually pre-installed already, and they're blacked off, so they're not the kind of brass or chrome headed screws that we see from time to time. So that's really good. Nice big cutout for gaining access to the back of your CPU cooler. So if you're going for an aftermarket cooler, then again you can get really good access to that. And another thing which I really like is the fact that there's rubber grommets. So we've got a rubber grommet in this top section for your supplementary power supply connection or pass-through fan wires. There's another one here, which again, if you're using any kind of water cooling or fans up top, nice and easy to pass through there. And also you've got two here as well. These possibly are a little bit farther out than I would have liked to have seen. Possibly the case could have actually been a little bit shorter and maybe move that in a little bit. There is the kind of the extra 9 pins, which rarely we use on motherboards these days. They tend to kind of end about here. So there is quite a big gap between where the power supply wires are going to come through and the motherboard. Again, not the end of the world, but something that maybe they could have had 2 lots of rubber grommets going through there to give you a little bit of space in, but that is being pretty picky. Also, we've got the option as well, so if you are putting 120mm fans in behind here, there is actually some cutouts, 3 cutouts, so you can pass your wires through to the back section for wiring, which again, nice little feature, not really necessary, because obviously it is designed to look like this, but again, if you are putting a 360mm radiator in there, or 3 120mm fans, you can do so. You can also, if you want to, put in 140mm fans, 3 120s, 3 140s, ideally 2 140s, but 3 will physically fit. There is quite a lot of metal going on behind here as well, so some of the fans blades will be blocked to some extent because of the way that it's actually built. You could, if you wanted to, take your time and get a Dremel or some sort of cut-in tool, and you can actually remove a lot of that metal work. It won't actually affect the structural rigidity of it too much, as long as you leave the crossbars in place. So if you do want a little bit of extra airflow, if you find it is slightly restrictive, then of course you could do that. One thing that has been omitted on this particular case, which we did get with the Gamemax F15, was the additional magnetic filter which stuck on the back of here to give you an extra layer of filtration. Now, as most people will be probably aware, filtration on top of filtration isn't particularly good for fans, especially larger fans which suffer from low static pressure anyway. So not the end of the world, but it would have been nice to have seen the option to put in if you wanted to. Again, the mesh on the front of this case is actually quite tight anyway, so that should do a pretty decent job. Looking at the top of the case, now we'll try and get some B-roll there so you can see it, but you've got mounting options up there for either a 120 x 2, 2 140s, or a 240mm radiator. A 280 would probably go in there as well, but then you may have to take into consideration depth. It is nicely raised off from where the top of the motherboard would be, so you've got a nice bit of clearance there. So even if you have got a slightly bigger water cooler, 240mm, AIO, 280mm, you should be fine, but obviously do check with your motherboard just in case some of the VRM coolers or your RAM sticks are a little bit on the large side. Again, we'll be taking a deeper look into that when we go ahead and actually do the build. At the back, we've got a single 120mm fan, which isn't an RGB one, which I'm kind of disappointed about, if I'm completely honest with you. The whole point of this is the front, which is the whole RGB thing. So it would have been nice to have a 120mm fan just to match what is there, but at least there is a fan anyway, so at least you have got some exhaust going on there, and it is a reasonably good quality Lian Li fan. This is another thing which slightly elevates the F15 over this, because you did get the rear mounted RGB or addressable RGB fan included as part of the kit. On the back, we've got 7 PCI Express expansion slots, and all of them are the removable ones with thumb screws. So if you want to, you can take those out and replace them without having to bend any bits of metal, which is all good. There is actually an option for this case to have a vertical mounting, which again is another reason why the Gamemax F15 slightly trumps it in this particular instance, as that one enabled you to do vertical mounting straight out of the box. Unfortunately, with the Lian Li 215, you do need to purchase a separate bracket, remove all those parts on the back, and put the new expensive PCI extension. So let's flip round to the back so get a closer look. So again, pretty much standard deal, identical layout to the Gamemax F15. So we've got room here for a 120mm fan, a little bit of vertical adjustment up and down there. You can't put any larger fans in, unfortunately. A little bit of ventilation at the top here, which is good because that means we've got a little bit of extra headroom for radiators, etc. in this top section. Got your IO section, that's all nicely finished, no rough edges. Obviously removable plates as we discussed, and a section at the bottom for mounting your power supply. Now you can mount the power supply in here however you want to, either up or down. There is ventilation on both the bottom channel and the top channel. Obviously depending on your setup you may choose to do either. If you're maybe on carpet, then obviously mount it upwards so you can just pull some of that fresh air in from the case. If you're on a desk or an enclosure of some sort, then obviously mount it face down. There is filtration there along the full width of the bottom, and we've got this nice removable filter, which is another part where Lian Li actually trumps the Gamemax case. So the Gamemax case had a pretty naff filter on the bottom of it, just one of those little flexible ones, whereas this is a full-length one enclosed in plastic, which is really nice to see. And actually what you can do, some of you are probably thinking, well, you can only take it out from the back. Well, actually it does slide all the way through. So with the front off, you can actually pull it all the way through. So depending where it is, if you've got it in a situation like a desk where you can't really get to the back, you can just take this front panel off and actually slide this forward, which is, I don't know if that was an intentional thing or whether I just found it out by mistake, but certainly I think that will help some people. So let's take a look at the back. So the case panel itself, actually, let's just show you that first of all. Again, a little bit of flex, and we've only got those two sections, the two lugs there and there, which actually hold it all in place. Definitely for sure you will get some flexing in the central section, just because the way that these things are and the tolerances, there is a very, very small kind of gap, and if you actually press on it when it's installed, you can kind of flex that panel a bit. So again, it does kind of show its cheaper origins and the fact that it is from a kind of generic design. If it was a Lian Li case, I'm sure that wouldn't be the outcome. So taking a look in the rear, so yeah, really nice layout, again, pretty much identical to the Gamemax F15, apart from obviously we've got these rubber grommets which we looked at earlier. There's the same sort of tie down points as well. We've also got the Lian Li controller for the fans and also the RGB. So you've got 5-volt, 3-pin addressable RGB. There is also a pass-through which goes to the motherboard, so you hook that to your motherboard, then your motherboard will take control of the lighting. There doesn't appear to be any obvious switchover, so if you don't have that connected to a motherboard, then you can control it from the button on the top. If you've got it connected to a motherboard, it seems that will be overriding it. It's probably going to be a case of where you press and hold the lighting button for like 2 seconds and it switches between the two. That is very common with these kind of devices, although we will find that out in our full build. Moving around, so we've got our I/O section coming down here, and a nice inclusion, which again could have been done on the Gamemax one, but wasn't. These nice Velcro straps, so you can just unhook those and do all your wiring, keep everything nice and neat and tidy. The RGB controller, actually going back to that quickly, there is an option to connect up 6 fans if you want to. Again, it's just 3-pin setup, so as standard you'd have your 2 front ones possibly and the rear one, although because that is a difference in sizing, I would probably advise against it. You're better off connecting up the 2 front fans to the controller and the rear fan to your motherboard, because obviously a 120mm fan spins at a different RPM than what the larger 200mm ones will, and trying to control all the fans from that unit with the same RPMs across these different size fans is just going to be an absolute nightmare. So personally, I would probably advise, maybe if you can, connecting up all the fans directly to the motherboard and just use this as a RGB controller. Another slight downside of the RGB controller, which again, I hate to say it, but the Gamemax F15 does trump it on here. The controller is actually better in that case. You've got a remote control as well, so you can take control of your lighting, etc. You can actually connect more devices, and also there's manual control, so you can press buttons, although that's pretty much irrelevant because the side panels are going to be on. But one crazy thing is the power connector is longer. The power connection for this controller basically comes down to here and kind of terminates here. That isn't too bad if you're going to have some kind of SATA power drive down here, so you can piggyback it off of there. But it still does mean that there's not a lot of room for actually connecting that up. It's probably a little bit difficult for you guys to see it as it is in the video, but that isn't a particularly long cable. So I would probably be of the mind of maybe unscrewing those screws, take the RGB controller off of there and maybe relocate it down here, just with this like a sticky double-sided pad. Put it down in this section, then that way you can keep all your wiring nice and tidy up front, and then just have the power cable going down. Or if you haven't got a SATA drive in here, you can just take the cable along a little bit further to your power supply to keep it tidy. Again, that's probably something we'll play around with when we do the build, but it's just one of those things that just having a little bit of a longer cable on there would make life a little bit easier, and possibly a different controller. So again, we've got the rubber grommets, which are behind the kind of wiring channel here. So that's actually quite nice for keeping it all nice and tidy. You can take up your main 24-pin power connector and your GPU connectors all through there, and keep that all looking nice and tidy. Although we haven't got a tremendous amount of depth here, there's probably about 15 or 16 millimeters, which isn't a great deal of depth there. So if you are starting to bunch up cables in these channels, then that is going to stick out a little bit, and obviously that is potentially a problem because we don't have that little latch on the front here for the case. So we might see a little bit of case bow there, which is again, not a great thing to see. Moving down a little bit further, we've got our drive cages, non-captive screws as we've just found out, and these just lift off which is actually a little bit difficult to do because it hasn't got a captive screw on it. So you can put a 2.5-inch drive in there, so either a spinning metal disc or a SSD, that kind of thing. And yeah, would have been nice to have seen captive screws on there. Does seem to be a little bit of a letdown on that, if I'm completely honest with you, but you can put 2 of them in there. If I remember correctly, I'm pretty sure the Gamemax only had 1 removable drive cage, or caddy rather, so this has got 2 straight off, although you may find yourself losing the screws pretty easily. Looking at the bottom section, the basement, nice and open basement section, so power supply wise, you've got no issues there. You can put a pretty big power supply in there, although do take into account there is actually a drive cage down there, which can fit 2 3.5-inch drives, so one goes actually inside the caddy and one can be mounted on the top. You can also, if you want to, put like a 3.5 on the bottom, a 2.5 on the top, all those kinds of combinations. So realistically, 2 3.5-inch drives and 2 2.5-inch drives, or 1 3.5 and 3 2.5, or just go NVMe and ignore all this altogether. The bottom section is all completely filtered, like we said before, so if you actually are having spinning discs in here, or mechanical discs which do generate heat, you will get a little bit of airflow through them. It's a relatively open section, and obviously it's filtered as well with this nice long filter, so dust shouldn't be an issue. There is actually some really nice foam on the bottom here, so if you're mounting your power supply in here, if you've got a power supply which has got maybe a little bit of a rattle to it, then that is going to absorb most of the noise from it, which is pretty cool. Connectivity wise, we've got a HD audio connector, which is showing off some ketchup and mustard, which again, not ideal, but not the end of the world. We've also got your usual connections, so USB 3.0, of which there's 2 ports on the top. And we've also got our I/O, which is in here somewhere. There's a trouble with black tie cables, you can't see them. So you've got your usual suspects there. So you've got your reset switch, you've got a power switch, and also power LED. So yeah, pretty much, that's all blacked out. Those are all blacked out. Why is that not blacked out? Come on, it's not a lot to ask. I don't need to be getting a Sharpie out on a £70 case. Okay, so I think we've pretty much saturated our knowledge base of everything which is going on in the back here. Yeah, I would say there's no real kind of issues there, no problems. One thing you can do as well, which I didn't mention already, is this drive cage is actually removable and movable, as in you can move it closer to the front. So if for some reason you've got a particularly large power supply or it's getting in the way, then you can actually take this out and move it about 1 inch to the left, well, your left and my right. You get the general idea. We'll have a look when we see the bottom of it, which actually we could probably do now. So tipping over the case, we can see on the bottoms we've got rubber feet, quite large padded ones as well, and the whole thing is raised off the deck around about 1/2 inch, maybe 3/4 inch. And again, we've got this full length filter, which does come out both ways, which is actually pretty darn cool. I quite like that. So again, ventilation isn't going to be an issue on there. Normally these cases tend to be positive pressure, at least from my previous usage. With those 2 200mm fans at the front, you do get a bit of positive pressure, and if you've got the dust filter on the top, magnetic one, you probably will find that most of the air is going to be pushed out, so it's not going to be trying to draw in too much air, which is obviously better for dust control and that kind of stuff. Looking a little bit closer, you can see there's the mountings there, so for the hard drive, so it's on those rubber grommets as well, which is going to get rid of some of the noise and vibration of those discs, and you can just loosen those off and pull it out and move it along a little bit if you wanted to. So yeah, pretty flexible there. Let's take a look at the top of the case. So on the top we have got usual suspects. So we've got this magnetic filter, which comes off pretty easily, and we've got our main I/O. So we've got a power button, which has got an illuminated surround. Also next to that is a very small reset button, and next to that is a larger LED button. So if you want to cycle through the LEDs from the controller, you can just press the button there and it'll cycle through the default options, which we'll take a look at later. I like the fact that they've made that button a lot bigger than the reset one, which is actually a little bit difficult to press, so you don't accidentally reset your PC when you're trying to change the lighting, which we've all done. I'm sure we have. We've all done it. Let me know in the comments if you've done that. I'm sure you have. Anyway, moving on. So we've got a combo jack for headset microphone, which is something we're starting to see more and more these days. And we've got their 2 USB 3.0 ports, although they seem to be coloured with just the black insert, so you wouldn't know obviously that they are 3.0, but it is a 3.0 header and they are 3.0 ports. So actually quite nice for the overall look, that you haven't got like some blue thing jutting out there, which makes it look a little bit weird. So here we are with the case with the power supply in and just crudely mocked up, so you can see what the lighting situation is like. And as you can see, it actually does look pretty decent, and I did notice straight away that Lian Li's RGB controller has a little few differences than what we're used to seeing. Some of the lighting effects are a little bit different. So let's quickly cycle through some of those. So this is the default one that happens when you turn it on. Then you've got static red, green, blue, yellow, pale blue, pink, blues that you like your pink. We've got a pure white, which is actually quite nice and bright. And then we've got our unicorn puke. Now I would say, if anything, the colours do seem a little bit muted. Possibly it's not coming through on the camera, but in person they do seem a little bit on the muted side, if I'm completely honest. Next one is a fade. And then we've got our kind of flow section. So if you've got an older RGB setup, older RGB motherboard, then this will tie in quite nicely with that, even though they are addressable. It just goes through that fading. Then you've got this one, which is kind of like a, well, I don't even know what you'd call that. And this is quite a nice one as well. So it goes round, goes back like a clock going forward and backwards through the various colours. One thing I did notice is, well, this is quite common with a lot of these RGB type controllers, where the RGB doesn't always quite work as it's intended to. So if you look quite closely, although it's going to be really difficult to see on camera, you do see that some of the colours don't actually match all the way through. So you get kind of, rather than being a proper flow, there's an odd colour that crops up, or it doesn't really work as it's intended to. It's difficult to explain, but there's kind of like little gaps in the colour every now and then, which again is very common with these RGB controllers. So again, another one, so going through the colours, etc. And then we go back to our statics again. So I guess you get the general idea. That is what it looks like. So I'll put the front panel on now so you can see what it looks like. Also, you can see there at the bottom, you can see those RGBs which are lit up. Again, they are to illuminate the Lian Li badge on the bottom, which actually I do like. That's a nice touch. Do be careful when you're putting the mesh on. Obviously, don't bang it from this section in the front, because there's little or no support behind there. So yeah, do be careful. That's another difference between the Gamemax F15, where it had kind of plastic supports running down through this bit to strengthen a bit, so you could be a little bit more rough with it, but yeah, I guess really you're not supposed to be rough with a PC case. But hopefully now you can see the light in a slightly better angle. And we'll go through some of the other colours again. So again, we've got our pinks. Again, that is the unicorn puke, and it doesn't really look that unicorn pukey. It's a little bit muted. Now the fans themselves are completely unregulated at the moment, so they're spinning at I believe it's the full speed, so it's 800 RPM just straight through the controller. And I wouldn't say they're necessarily noisy. You can certainly hear air kind of whooshing through. I don't know whether I could live with that full term, but again, normally you'd connect that to a motherboard and it would regulate it, etc, etc. But we'll see how that goes. Normally these controllers are absolutely useless, and they don't do a PWM job very, very well. Very problematic with all of these controllers at the moment. I haven't found one yet which works perfectly for both RGB and PWM. Normally you get one work better than the other, but yeah, we'll see what this works like in the full build when we get around to doing that. So this is following on from our £1,000 PC build guide that we did a little while back, which you can check out up here. So this is basically what it's going to be centered around. So this case with a Radeon RX 5700 XT, 3600 AMD processor, etc, etc, all that usual kind of stuff. So if you want to see how that goes, then don't forget to click on the subscribe button, like I said earlier, and yeah, see how it all goes. But essentially, I think for £70, it isn't a bad case. Certainly, there are other options in the market. Obviously, Gamemax F15 being one of them. Things like the Fantex P400A Digital is another option, which yeah, does have its own benefits as well. But essentially, I suppose it's down to the whole look of it. And also, if you've got a thing for Lian Li, if you've got a thing for Lian Li, but you don't want to spend a ton of money, then this is definitely a really good option. Cooling wise, there's not going to be any issues at all. There's virtually no restriction on this mesh on the front, so you're going to get loads of air in there. For water cooling, I would probably advise against it. There's not really any options for putting pumps and things like that in the front. And again, having a radiator at the front on there is a little bit pointless, and it's probably going to add more complexity to what is otherwise a relatively simple build. So anyway, this has been the Lancool 215, or 215, or 215, whatever you want to call it. I've been Mike, this is Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and hopefully we'll catch you in the next video. Thanks for watching.